Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is an overview for a new device of mine. Actually, it's been around and it's appeared in a few of my mixes, but new for you guys, called Tape Deco. Obviously a little bit of a fiddle with words, taped echo, but Tape Deco, like Art Deco. We're decorating our sound with tapiness. And it is really an echo unit. But you can use it for choruses and reverbs, like any of those sorts of classic tape type things. With enough care and thought, you can get an awful lot out of it. So what does this sound like? Here's an FM pad. Sounds nice, but you're like, yeah, whatever. Until I do this. Typical FM pad is pretty thin and flat. Rich and warm. So it takes a hard to work with sound and makes it rich and warm. Quite simply, that's what it does. Using a different type of sound, sort of PWM type sound, sort of thing you might get from a 2-oscillator Roland. Yeah, how we're getting this nice long rolling, rich reverb-like echo. It's nothing but echoes, there's no diffusion or anything like that, there's no trickery in here, it's just an interesting architecture. While we can do pretty straight, simple echoes like this, another one of my devices, while we can definitely do that, you'll find something like 2020 modulating delay makes more sense just if you want to do that sort of stuff simply. When you're looking to do something a bit more exotic, how the two go together very nicely, or if we want the more traditional delay. Yeah, we end up with a really, really rich sound. That's a lot of how I end up with such rich sounds when I mix. So we get rid of that guy there. That's quite simply what it does. Overview. It does, as I say, have an unusual architecture, which we'll look at in a moment. The fact that it has an unusual architecture is part of how you get the sound and feel. The reasoning underneath this and having an unusual architecture is that there are so many of the usual suspects devices these days which are made to be incredibly safe. And that's fine and interesting. They are very reliable workhorses in a sense. One of the frustrations is they just don't give that wild richness that you got with analog type gear, which often had strange architectures. The software makes it very easy to always have the perfect safe architecture. The downside is you get the perfect safe sound out of it. So the aim here was to create an old-fashioned analog tapey, there's no pedantics here whatsoever, it's not an emulation of anything at all, merely a mindset. We get this interesting unit that will do quite a lot of things. So we've got basically a pair of echoes, an A and a B. Just what you expect. There's an ordinary echo. You can make it feed back. And then there's a second echo, and you can feed that back as well. And then you can take the whole signal and feed that back into itself. So that is a lot of feedback, and it will go into self-oscillation pretty darn easily. I will put big warning on the screen. Be aware this will go into self-oscillation really easily. So my advice very strongly is always run a limiter, which you should do anyway. It's just good practice. Just never push into it whilst you're mixing. That is bad practice. So we can create quite complex echoes. We can either create a pair of them, so it's a simple multi-tap, or we can have them interact with each other so that they shmush and start to howl if you don't have the modulation going. There's an LFO rate for each of them, which allows us to push more feedback and get that really rich hanging sound that this sort of gear was always so well loved for. I haven't tried it on guitar, but with the right situation, this should be gorgeous on guitar. It's gorgeous on synthesizers. How do you get it? Well, there will be a page on my own site, but ultimately that will link you to my Ko-fi account, Ko-fi, and it's $5 or more to get this wee fella. Remember, if you wanted the 2020 modulating delay, that one you can pick up for a pay what you want. Please don't say it's free, it's pay what you want. If you only want to pay $0, but pay what you want. It is tremendously valuable. Put some value back, because if you don't return value, how can you ever expect to get any yourself? So $5 or more for this fella, because it is specialist equipment that does different things from what you're used to. All right, how we install such a fella. This comes as a VST3, 64-bit Windows only, no Apple. Please don't ask about Apple versions. There isn't an Apple version, and nor do I expect that there ever realistically will be. So installation is important. It's very simple. You take the whole folder. So obviously unzip, and inside that there will be the Tape Deco. Take that whole folder, not the DLL, the whole folder, because it's got resources that are required to make this run, and you put that in this PC, OS, which is normally your C drive, program files, common files, and then VST3. You can have subfolders. If you've got several of my devices, you might have a Benedict Roff-Marsh folder, in which case you might put it in there, because that's what I have. So that's your install. It is simple as that. There is only one place that you should ever put a VST3, and that is there. So look for your common files VST3 folder. That is your pathway. So long as you've done that, it should run fine. If it doesn't run fine, then either you don't have the ability to read VST3s, you're running an Apple, or you've just not installed it right. You've decided to be more creative and more clever than, well, common sense would say. Go back, do it again, do it properly, and it should work. If you do have support needs, this video on YouTube, there's the ability to type in questions, comments, what have you below. Obviously, I love to hear engagement. The only place for support is here on YouTube. Please don't ask me anywhere else. I will refer you back to YouTube. A, because the question may already been asked and answered before. B, somebody else may be able to help you if I haven't gotten there before. And C, that's just my request. Because if you're getting this for next to nothing, then public support is the way to go. Alrighty, we'll now move forward and walk through the device. The very first thing is you can use this without any kind of training or understanding, but it'll be a bit random. The first thing we really should do is get our head around what is the architecture for this. So the signal comes in, that we will call dry. It is bused to the dry knob, which goes to the output. So that's the level of the raw signal. Nothing is done to dry at all. If you are running this at full, it will be exactly the same level as comes in. Once you've got a pile of effects, then ultimately the effect will become more louder than your input signal. If that bothers you at all, then pull this back and balance it just so. Having the split rather than the mix knob actually gives you a lot more freedom with your mixing and also things like automation and overall levels as well. Hence why I do the two more often than not. We've got a tone which sits in the middle here. What this tone is a bandpass filter. It is pretty characterful. There is no point at which you can get a perfectly flat signal out of this. Again, I considered, should I offer an option, and I decided, nope, this is always going to be a character device. If you want perfect output as for input, then go use somebody else's device. This is designed to quite dramatically change the character. Somewhere in here is what you're mostly going to use. It has a notable difference, but you may well find uses for it somewhere else. That tone is the first thing that's hit with the wet signal. So the very first echo that comes back is affected. That's important because there are some delay units that the first echo that comes back is completely unaffected and then echoes later are affected, or there are plenty of units, including some of my own, where the tone comes after all the effects and mixing and what have you, and then it's just on the output. So the overall output gets the tone once. But the advantage of this approach, the tone here is set for the broader feedback. So once the outputs of A and B have hit mix, it comes back to tone. As you will see, the feedback here goes just to itself. So if I've got a noticeable tone difference and add, the tone difference doesn't change. But if I add this feedback, you can hear that tone being applied over and over. So our signal just gets thinner and thinner. So we can, if we have both running, it will have repetition of the same signal and repetition of the re-affected signal. Really important to understand how that works. So tone is applied before we get to our first echo. If we are using the sub feedback, which is the internal feedback for the delay unit, tone is applied once. If we are using the feedback for the whole system, then tone gets applied every time it goes back around. We will discuss these quite a few times, so there are lots of opportunities to get used to that. We've obviously got our delays, so delay A and delay B. Just using one delay and having this set to listen to delay A makes it a pretty standard echo unit, obviously with that tone control. So if you want to get darker, there you go. B is not exactly the same as A. So you see here that echo B is driven from echo A. So if we have this set like this, that's exactly what we expect. But if we move this out, there's a big lag, and then echo B does what is expected of it. This is part of how that drives. I know a lot of more modern units would just go, oh, we'll feed them separately, but then we don't get the same result. So delay A is driving delay B. So you can add a pre-delay to your delay, which is particularly effective when doing reverby type stuff. And notice that this is picking up the feedback of delay A as well as so that gives us a much more complex signal. It does take some time playing around with this to get used to this. That's your delays A and B. Obviously we can mix them, so we hear just delay A, but sometimes it gets more complex than that, or just delay B, but remember that delay B is always hearing delay A. So there's very limited options for not hearing. So if you're wanting to do a straight echo, then just use delay A and keep B out of the game. As soon as you add B, then you can get these really complex feelings. This is deliberately not BPM synced, A, because of architecture, because it is using genuine feedback loops, which will create a time lag as each goes around. And plus, this is analog style, so it is not meant to be that safety safe thing, remember? So if you're looking for something, then just use your feelings to get that point where it works out. I deliberately haven't even given it any numbers, so there's no point sitting there with a calculator trying to work out what's going on. If I recall correctly, each one of these is 500 milliseconds. So it is roughly 250, but you've just got to use your feel. And if you use your feel, then you will end up with a really nice grooving echo rather than a rigid, locked-in, boring as well, something that's boring that shouldn't be boring. All right, that's our two echoes, which can feed back to themselves and then, of course, be fed back in total. So looking at the algorithm here, we've got our wet signal, echo A goes out to the mix, echo B goes out to the mix goes back in again. That's what the big feedback knob does. It takes that pre-mix. It's obviously taking that before what we hear here. Otherwise, yeah, you wouldn't get the same results. Again, vagary of these things. So my little thing there is ever so slightly wrong, but same net result. So your main feedback that you'll be encouraged to use is this one, but these are equally important, have different roles. So your main feedback takes the whole signal that's been created, regardless of its balance that's going to wet, and sends it back to go again. And this just creates a feedback within each unique delay unit, which is how you get those really complex reverby type echoes. Tone, we've covered. So don't disregard tone. In this case, we may, if that were 50-50, we may want to simply say, okay, I'll go harder here and then push the level. That gives us a special kind of a feel, which is quite different from this. So really take your time to find the feels. This is not a one set and forget. It's finding the feel for what you have got. So it will take a little longer to use, especially before you really grok and get a feeling for where its lovely bits are. It will take longer to use than your standard echo, but it will give you far more beautiful results if you give it that time. Tone, mix. Okay, so as we said, mix allows us to choose what goes out the wet. It doesn't mix what goes back to feedback, that's already mixed and sent, but it chooses what we hear. But it doesn't rule out what's happening at delay B, because that's still being sent back via this feedback. If there's no feedback here, you don't hear it, but if there's feedback here, you'll still hear it because it's going back to delay A. It's really important to understand this, that everything's very alive all the time. So this, if you want the single delay that's being affected and modified by B, or the other way around, if you want to hear more of B which is being driven and affected by A, or if you want to hear both. The knob will be more effective in some situations than another. So again, if you go, but that's not as same as, you know, Filter Fab Pro something or other. No, it's not meant to. It is deliberately meant to be the complete opposite of your typical safe, more of the same sort of thing. It's meant to be wild and strange, because you can get beautiful results from it as a result of its wildness and strangeness if you play that, if you ride the wave that it has. And then we've got this LFOs. We've got two different rates, one for A, one for B, and then a modulation depth. There's also a stereo option, so that just runs in mono or in stereo. It's taking whatever rate is set here and applying A to A, B to B, either like this or like this. Because they can have different rates, stereo will sound wide, but won't necessarily give you that seesaw thing. And then depth obviously is going to depend on how long your echoes are as to how dramatic the depth is. There is one depth for the both of them. Again, a limit, but a deliberate limit. It's a case of finding the balance. You've then got this button which dramatically increases your range. And is great for weird noises. I have used it a couple of times in some of my own tracks. It's not a thing for client mixes more often than not, but this is designed to be able to do some wild things. If you're right down here, you get the same sort of results, but you're going to find that too hard to control. So this gives you far more fine control. Most you're going to want that off, but sometimes you'll be like, cool. You will have noticed this is very deliberate. So if you are looking to do, I guess people call it lo-fi, but if you're looking to do classic tape delay things where you are messing with the knobs and times in real time, this will do that. There isn't a single one thing that controls all times. By all means, most hosts these days have the ability to set up controllers, macro buttons, things like that. Set that up because it's going to suit your needs of the moment. If I set something up, chances are it wouldn't suit your needs and it would become a pain in the patootie and you would have to work around it and go, why have I got these knobs that don't really do what I want them to do? That is really it. We can run this as a chorus. It will whine a little if there's too much. Here how we're getting a really rich how it's really nice chorus, but it's not, you're not getting an obvious swishiness. It's just a fatness, kind of like a unison, but not. And there's no particular preset way to make it do exactly that. As you'll notice, there are no presets. You can save your own, but there are no presets, because this is not about preset mindsets. It's about finding your own way. If you want to save things off, more power to you. Then, of course, we can get into having a chorus. So that gives you most of that richness that we had before, but an echo. If we want to push, or here. So now it's taking this obvious echo, the delay, and feeding it back to number one. So we can hear that moving more. So we might say, I'm going to reduce that a little bit because it's a little obvious. A really nice rich sound. Obviously very much depends on your your mix, and I am going pretty heavy-handed here, but if you want to get the joys of these things, then go heavy-handed, because that's how you're going to find those sounds which this sort of thing will do better than anything else. So that's your chorus followed by an echo, as though you put in a chorus unit and then you put in a delay unit. So you can do it in the one box. Obviously we can get into reverbs. Again, this absolutely isn't meant to sound anything like the typical, Reverb Pro, Fab, whatever. This has got real character, a huge richness, which is far, well, in my opinion, obviously far greater than what you get out of your typical reverb units. It's overmixed there. So a nice jazz room or whatever. So tons of options there as to how you do things, or of course just getting it out into two. Long. Echoes that how this changes the mix, which means that you get echoes, if you're only listening to one of them, which are quite different from if you were just using a standard echo unit. If we increase our feedback here, then again we get that washing into reverb, or more of that multi-tap. So there are a lot of ways to get really interesting sounds from here and out into the wacky. Alright, so there's no real this is what you should do, it just is. We'll go back again, we've got this really nice rich pad, which moves nicer. It's a very sort of DX70 kind of core sound, but it moves much nicer than that, and I personally think it moves much nicer than a Alpha Juno, because it's richer and warmer than that kind of chorus. Plus it's unique. Or just back to this guy. Obviously, for this sort of echo to play out, you want lots of space. But if you're doing that kind of stuff, you know what you want. If you want it, price is $5 or more over at Ko-fi, coffee, whatever. It is a character device very much, so don't expect it to be the same as your. This is very predictable. It is meant to be somewhat unpredictable. You will learn the feel of it. Once you get the feel of it, then you will find that there are times where you just go, that is going to be really gorgeous there. In which case, get out, use it. Obviously, if you have used it and it's really become a feature of something, we can all hear it. post down below. If it's not particularly obvious, or even worse, if you're just going, check my tune, bro, then I'll probably say, yeah, thank you, but no. But if it's really clear and you've explained how and where you've used it and we can really hear it, then we'll be delighted to share in your successes. Get out there, have fun. You have a great day now.